Well, it's certainly a pleasure and an honor to be able to have this conversation with you. And of course, the occasion for it is the release of your recent book, Essential Writings on Creation Spirituality. So I'm wondering if we could begin by having you explain what creation spirituality is and why it's so important.
Well, thank you, Richard. It's good to be with you. The first word is really important, creation. That for too long in the modern era, I think our thinking begins with the human. But as the new science tells us, a new creation story from science, hey, there's been 13.8 billion years that have brought the earth here and the human here. And it really is the height of arrogance, I think, to begin with the human. A good example of that is Descartes. I think, therefore I am. No, that's not true at all. We are here, and we are because the universe has been gestating for 13.8 billion years. And I think a lot of our ecological crisis derives from this anthropocentrism. What Pope Francis, in his very fine encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si', called the narcissism of our species. It begins with ourselves. And even the Bible doesn't begin with the human at all. The first chapter of the Bible, chapter 1 of Genesis, is a cosmology. It begins with light and the moon and the earth and the animals and the plants and the trees, and then humans come at the very end, and all of it is called good along the way. All of it is called good, and that word is repeated. And at the very end, when we're all on board, is called very good, and that word in Hebrew can be translated beautiful also, very beautiful. But it really is appalling. I mean, I think 95% of Christian preachers begin with chapter 2 and 3 of Genesis, which is about us and our failings. But that's not the story. The story is that we're part of a drama that, what can I say, culminates in our advantage, that is our existence on this amazing earth with all these amazing creatures, giraffes and whales and rainforests and oceans and rivers. I mean, it's all there. And it's called very good and very beautiful. And so that's creation spirituality. It begins with creation, not with a human. And secondly, therefore, it's also feminist, because the wisdom tradition in the Bible is about finding God in nature. It's the theophany, the experience of the divine in nature. Bill Everson, a wonderful California poet, put it this way. He said, most people experience God in nature or experience God not at all. So once again, all this has tremendous implications when it comes to the climate change and the earth crisis that we all are in today, as we literally face our extinction as a species. And so it's about creation spirituality, about bringing the sacred back to our worldview, if you will, and realizing the sacred begins with the universe itself, and it's always something bigger than ourselves and the earth, and then we, like the other creatures, need to fit in. And the tradition is also prophetic. The wisdom tradition of Israel, it talks about that wisdom is a friend of the prophets. And of course, the prophets, as Rabbi Heschel says, interfere. They say no. The mystic in us says yes. Yes is our experience of the joy and the delight and the beauty and the gratuity of our being here, of our existence and all the earth that makes it possible. But the prophet in us is the person who says no, who interferes, no to injustice. And so that's emphasized too in the creation tradition. Now you can say, so many people say, why haven't I heard of this? Why haven't I heard of this? Well, it's the oldest tradition in the Bible. The J source of the Hebrew Bible is creation-centered. But we haven't heard about it because since the 4th century, our Christianity has been carrying the empire on its shoulders. You know, it inherited the empire in the 4th century, and you had St. Augustine being the primary theologian in that time, And he's the one who came up with the idea of original sin, which got everyone all in pretzels because it's not in the Bible, actually. Jesus never heard of it. No Jews ever heard of original sin. So there was this big detour made by mainline Christianity. Now, there have been objectors all along. The Celtic tradition does not begin with the human, it begins with the cosmos. And the Celtic Christians settled all the way down the Rhineland. They gave us Hildegard of Bingen, Meister Eckhart, Francis of Assisi in northern Italy, and so many other great souls, Thomas Aquinas, who saw the world in terms of creation and spirituality, not in terms of fall, redemption, religion. But there are those two streams in Christianity. Fall, redemption begins with the fall, not with creation, and the creation tradition. But an empire prefers the fall, redemption, and original sin, because it gets people doubting themselves, and therefore they fall in line and join the army and so forth to conquer people in the name of Christ or something like that. It has very little to do with Jesus. And so this has been a minority, if you will, tradition, lineage, but great souls, including, I just mentioned, Hildegard, Aquinas, Francis, Meister Eckhart, and Julian of Norwich, great medieval spirits who really begin with creation spirituality and who inculcate that dimension of the divine feminine to balance the sacred masculine. Like this wonderful woman over my shoulder, that's Julian of Norwich, who lived through the bubonic plague of the 14th century. And in spite, everyone was going crazy, but she wasn't. She was grounded in creation, in a sacredness. She said, God is the goodness in creation. God is the goodness in nature. God is nature, she says. She goes on and on about the non-dualism of spirit and nature, spirit and matter. So creation spirituality loves science because scientists tell us about nature, after all. And so, like Thomas Aquinas spent his whole life bringing Aristotle, the best scientist of the 13th century, into Christian faith, and he paid a real price for it. He was condemned 3 times after he died before they made him a saint. So this is a very exciting and refreshing worldview that has been on the sidelines, really, or has been sidelined by mainstream Christianity, but I think it's coming into its own in our time. And certainly Pope Francis, first of all, by choosing the name Francis, but also by his fine encyclical. One scientist told me that the encyclical Laudate Si was the finest work on science and spirituality that the Vatican has ever produced in all of its existence. So, there are real signs that we're waking up, but the question is it soon enough?
Well, very good. Thank you. That was very helpful and very thorough. I do get a sense that in some way, creation spirituality is kind of a movement and among people. And how is this movement manifesting? Is it happening within the churches, outside the churches, as independent groups? How is it coming into the social fabric?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the answer to the question is both and. It's both within churches and in spiritual movements, many of which are, are moving beyond organized religion at this time. As you know, we're hearing a lot of talk about this between religion and spirituality, and how a very high percentage, I think last poll I saw was 75% of young people under 30, don't identify as religious, but they do identify as spiritual. So unfortunately, there's been something of a separation, because religion moves very slowly. It's like a great big ship that doesn't have brakes, and it takes a long time to move, to shift directions. And I think with time running out, on Mother Earth, after all, latest scientific statement from the UN says we have 7 years left at the most to change our ways if we're going to prevent the worst elements of sea rising and climate change and all that. The young people don't feel any loyalty to an institution or to particular churches so much as trying to save the earth. And of course, they have their future children and grandchildren in mind, as well they should. So spirituality moves faster than religion. And that's one reason I'm involved in a new group called the Order of the Sacred Earth. It's a new order, and it's not beholden to any particular religion, unlike most other religious orders. So this is a spiritual order that is about gathering people of all generations and of any spiritual tradition to bring to the table what our resources are, what our wisdom traditions have to teach us that will contribute to compassion and to the the saving of Mother Earth as we know her. So, but creation spirituality, there's a group called Creation Spirituality Communities, which was founded by some students of mine, and they're going very strong these days. So there's the Order of the Sacred Earth, there's the Creation Spirituality Communities, and then many people have read many materials, my books and others, and they've brought it into churches. So it's not an either or. It depends on the leadership really of the various churches or parishes or communities. And as I say, it's not just a Christian thing. For example, at our first vow ceremony for the Order of the Sacred Earth, there were 80 some people there, and there were Jews and there were Buddhists and Hindus. It was held in a Buddhist temple, actually, and Christians of all stripes. And at least one atheist came up to me, a 26-year-old young woman, and she said, I'm an atheist, but I'm looking for a community that shares my values, and my values are about sacredness of the earth too, so I want to join. So the one vow we take is I promise to be the best lover of Mother Earth and the best defender of Mother Earth that I can be. That's the one vow we all share. That all orders have vows. And with that, of course, it's a very open-ended gathering. And we gather online once a month to share what our particular pods, we call them, communities are doing. And there are people from around the world that have these pods in different continents and countries. So, there are many ways of getting the word out, especially in this time, of course, of internet and Zoom and all the rest.
Well, thank you. Again, it was very helpful. Let's focus at this point on institutional religion. Now, you gave a quick outline of exactly how, shall we say, Christianity diverged off course with Augustine and original sin and so on. Could you comment on where you think Christianity as a whole is right now as an organization, both the Catholic Church, Protestant Church, Orthodox Church? Where are they? What is happening with them?
Well, I do think that the eco-crisis is deconstructing a lot of mindsets around organized religion and around Christianity. I think that it's almost like a test, a litmus test. For example, if the fundamentalist Christians in this country are in denial about climate change, or if they have this weird theology, which doesn't deserve to be called a theology, but this weird idea that Christ is going to come on a cloud after a nuclear war or after global warming drowns us all. That's not Christianity. That's something else. Doesn't deserve the word Christianity or Christ in it. But I do think that in many ways, the line, not just of religion today, but of politics, is one of denial versus facing the facts. And of course, people often choose denial because it's easier than facing the facts. And then they build up this resentment towards science that comes with the facts that warn us, but also science comes with some solutions also with new technologies and so forth. So, I don't think we can look to the organized religion, frankly, for leadership that much. But if they can, like Pope Francis has done some very good things, such as Laudato Si, and also his criticism of extractive capitalism and the growing gulf, horrible gulf between the super wealthy and the rest of us, that what has doubled, I think, during coronavirus, doubled. The billionaires have doubled their wealth, and while all kinds of other people have fallen into poverty or bare survival. So I give Pope Francis credit for kind of blowing the horn about and ringing the bell about some of these realities. But I think at the grassroots, there are many Christians from both Protestant and Catholic and Orthodox. In fact, the Orthodox Church, to be honest, was ahead when it came to ecology. They were ahead of the Western churches because in the Orthodox Church, they didn't follow Augustine. And Augustine is the one who kept talking about nature's fallen, nature's fallen, nature's fallen. And he was so Platonic that he separated spirit from matter. He said, spirit is whatever is not matter. That's a quote. Well, again, Aquinas in the 13th century turns his back on Augustine and says, spirit is the elan, the vitality in everything, a blade of grass, a tree, a horse. So there's non-dualism there, and that's the future. That's today's science. E equals mc squared, that energy is spirit. That's very close to Aquinas' view of the world. So, and yet the Orthodox tradition, by not following Augustine's original sin, put much more emphasis on the beauty and the health of the of nature. And I give it credit for that. Now, right now, however, just today I was reading in the news how the Orthodox tradition is splitting over the whole Putin thing. And so there's a lot of internecine warfare going on now.
Over the whole what thing?
Putin, the invasion of Ukraine.
Oh, Putin, really?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah, the Russian Orthodox leader in Moscow has been a buddy of Putin, is not against the war. Whereas many Russian Orthodox churches in different parts of the world, and certainly in Ukraine, are breaking with the patriarch of Moscow because he's not stood up to Putin at all.
Right.
So, I mean, this is history, isn't it? This is how it goes, and it's not pretty, our history. That's why I love this. It's great teaching from I hope I remember his name. This poet who won the Nobel Prize for Poetry, Caribbean, Darrell Walcott. The fate of poetry is to fall in love with the world in spite of history. I think that's a powerful statement, and it really applies to what spirituality is. That we have to love this world, we have to love life more than the disturbances and evil that is exposed in history. You know, there's something deeper than human history going on, and we want to fall in love with that and teach that. And I think that's what is the role of the artist, but it's also the role of anyone who's a spiritual person or wants to be.
You have criticized the notion of original sin, but even before that, and apart from that, there seems to be this very widespread sense among the human race, not even among Christians, of something kind of profoundly wrong with the world. You could look at this in terms of the Buddhist concept of dukkha, avidya, whether it's suffering, ignorance, and so on. Even primitive cultures often complain that the gods deserted them a long time ago. So there seems to be this fundamental sense of something problematic, either in the world or in human nature. And how does your theology work with that?
I wrote a whole book on evil, a thick book, Deepak Chopra wrote the foreword to the most recent edition. I call it Sins of the Spirit, Blessings of the Flesh, Transforming Evil in Soul and Society. And you see, a lot of Augustine's theory on original sin is that it's about our sexuality. That's his position. And, to me, that's just unacceptable. And of course, if you look at apes, who are our nearest cousins in the animal world, they too have violence in them. They're capable of wars and of torture even. And so it's part of what we've inherited from our ancestors. And so, yeah, there is a problem. There are problems that we carry with us. But what I do in my study on evil is I take the 7 chakras of the East, compare them to the 7 capital sins of the West, because a chakra, I think, names the physiological, psychological, and spiritual centers of our bodies and psyches. When they're healthy, each of the chakras is a point of love, really, of energy, positive energy. But when they're off center, like Aquinas says, sin is misdirected love. That's very Jewish. The Hebrew word for sin is missing the bullseye. It's an archery term. So the bullseye would be a healthy chakra, but missing it would be comparable to a capital sin. So let me give an example. The 7th chakra is kind of the culminating one, the Kundalini energy, the fire coming up our spine and working through all the other 6 chakras, and then delivering light and good energy to other spirit beings, whether our ancestors, angels, or other human beings who are light beings who are trying to do good in the world. That's building community. That's the 7th chakra when it's healthy. But when it's not healthy, when it's off center, it's envy. Because envy recognizes the light in others. But instead of linking up to do good work together, create community together, it wants to shoot down the other. So it's the last one standing, if you will. So I think that methodology of 7 chakras and 7 capital sins, I think it really works, because this applies to each of the chakras. And the reason I offer this is that we need a new language for evil today, because Western religion is so oversold sin that people don't even want to talk it anymore. They don't want to talk about it anymore. I mean, I taught for 45 years, and I had many Protestants and Catholics tell me the same thing, that by the age of 15, they had heard so much about sin, and it always were shooting down the things they like most about living, that they gave up on it, And I think it's very true, though. We don't have a working vocabulary for evil in our culture, because I think religion has failed us and has oversold the idea of sin. Now, back to the idea of an original sin. Again, Augustine's is simply wrong. Elie Wiesel, who is a Jew and a very good one, a thoughtful one, he has said that the idea of original sin is not only not in the Bible, it is alien to Jewish thinking. That's a very strong statement. And therefore, we should quit projecting it onto Jesus, because he was a Jew. He never heard of it. No one heard of it until the 4th century. So as a theological category, it's dangerous. It creates doubt about individuals being here and the right to be here, and about doubt about our beauty. And but there is, yes, this quest to find out what's missing in our species. But look at this. We have now counted 14 other hominid species, our cousins. Now we know about Neanderthal, but the others are new from Southeast Asia. And the point about all of these, including Neanderthal, is that they're out of business. They're all extinct. So, that is a wake-up call, that we humans are capable of extinction, and we're really close to it right now. But we do have to clean up our violence, what I would call the reptilian brain unleashed. I would say that dualism is key, that if we think in terms of always of us versus them, or body versus soul, and matter versus spirit, and that's going to get us into trouble. But I think that the concept of original sin kind of ties a lot of Christians down to asking the deeper questions about getting to the reason why we choose badly. And again, this is where I think talk about the chakras can help us, because we can easily fall into envy or arrogance or fear or gluttony, or in other words, avarice and greed. And these forces within all of us are capable of leading us into places where we do more evil than good in the world. As the scripture says, "But for your life and death, choose life." It's a choice. It's a daily choice not to choose those forces that are oriented toward necrophilia instead of biophilia.
In many ways, this brings up the subject of pleasure, because, as you suggested, in many ways, the Christian demonization of sin is very closely connected with the vilification of pleasure. So, in a creation spirituality, what is a wholesome, balanced attitude toward pleasure?
Well, yes, it's interesting. The Book of Wisdom says, this is wisdom, to love life. Now, that's what eros is, I think, is a passionate love of life in all its expressions. So Audre Lorde wrote a brilliant essay on eros, and she says, "I'm erotic when I bake bread, when I make a table, when I write a poem, or when I make love." So eros is that wonderful gift of passion that we bring to everything we do. And that includes our sexuality, and it includes our love of life in so many expressions. So I think that is to be honored and not held up for suspicion. Now, the book of the Song of Songs in the Bible, sometimes called the Song of Solomon, is a celebration of lovemaking as a theophany, as an experience of the divine, as a mystical experience, therefore, and rightly so. And it's interesting, the Jewish tradition, you're supposed to practice the Sabbath by reading the Song of Songs with your spouse and making love. So making love is not a sin, is one of the profound ways in which we say thank you for our existence. And obviously, it also brings another child, another being into the world under certain circumstances. But so I do think that we've carried this heavy burden of guilt that Augustine had. I mean, Augustine, we know, was very neurotic about sexuality. His mother was a very strict, like a Puritan around sexuality, and his father was a libertine. And so he was confused. I like to say, if anyone needed Freud, it was Augustine, but Freud came too late. And Augustine lived a very profligate life as a young man in his 20s, and then he had this conversion to Christianity, and he overreacted. And he's the one who came up with the idea that birth control was always evil because you're not letting a child happen, and you have to justify sex by bringing a child in the world, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's nothing mystical about his attitude toward sexuality. He also was very sexist. He said that man, but not woman, is made in the image and likeness of God. That's heavy, especially if you're a woman. And so he set the path of dualism, of gender injustice, of sexism, that's really built into the heart of patriarchal religion. So I think that eros very much has its place, that when Christ in John's Gospel said, "I have come that you may have life and have it in abundance," that's eros. That's a very erotic statement. And of course, Jesus himself was criticized for not fasting as heavily as his mentor, John the Baptist, did. And so we're eating and drinking with the wrong people, partying, and his meal experiences were very important ways of bringing together the rich and the poor. He deliberately did it that way, so they'd all hear what he had to say together in the same room, so they could debate it together. And so the burden put on eros in Christianity, which derives, I think, more from Greek philosophy, Hellenism, than it does from Jewish thinking, is a burden that many are still carrying, but many have really thrown it off and perhaps gone a little overboard in undoing that burden. But I think there's a middle way that needs to be found. And of course, such values as being true to one's vows and not breaking your partner's heart and all that, those are values that are still very, very important. But I think, and then just look at the demographics, that so many young people today do not get married until their late 20s or so. So obviously there's going to be relationships and there's going to be experimentation and so forth between the age of, of adolescence and adulthood. And of course, that's another topic, is the whole topic of our culture lacking rites of passage for young people. I mean, Christianity has confirmation, and of course, Judaism has the bar mitzvah and so forth, but I question whether these are cutting the mustard at this time. And I draw a lot of energy and insight and wisdom from the Native American people and the indigenous people everywhere, who makes, especially for boys, who make a big thing of their rites of passage at puberty. I say especially boys because they feel that the girls have their own natural rite of passage with menstruation, but that the boys have to have a severe one, otherwise they grow up angry. And I think that shows in our culture quite strongly. And I think even part of the gun culture is part of that lack of a real rite of passage for young people. I think our culture should take a much harder look at that. And while we're at it, we should also be looking at rites of passage for our older people, because eldership, and of course, a lot of people are living older today, but the whole tradition of elders is very important. And it's not the role of the elder to play golf the rest of their life or to play the stock market the rest of their life. There's something more serious going on. The elders should be relating to the youngest generation, the grandparents and grandchildren. And I think it would be appropriate to have rites of passage for elders, which are designed with the young people and are attended by young people too, so that the young get a better, fuller view of what life is about. The eldership is a real thing, and it's not just about tapping the heads of our grandparents at Christmas time. There's something important and necessary that goes on between the oldest and the youngest in the culture. The middle-aged, the parents, are too busy running the culture to really pay attention to that. And so that's something that's missing too. I think we need a healthy eldership. And one of the really interesting scientific happenings recently, for me anyway, was this. An anthropologist, a woman, she gathered a team and they went out to answer one question. Why did the Neanderthals disappear and Homo sapiens is still going? Now, the previous theory was, we beat them all up at war. We went to war and we beat them all up. We killed them all or something. But the truth is, we now know that many of us have Neanderthal DNA in us. So we weren't just killing them, we were making love with them. So that's interesting. What's more important is this is what she found, that Neanderthals tended to die around the age of 40 or 42, meaning there were no grandparents. Whereas Homo sapiens, we lived longer, and so there were 3 generations, 2 of them raising their kids, not just one. I think that is really important information because it shows that the role of the elder is not about being put in a corner and being tapped on the head. There's a necessary role that they play, and an important one. And I think this is in the memory of all indigenous tribes that I know of. They all honor the elders. And I think that's why they remember that they made it because of their grandparents, not just because of their parents.
Well, that's fascinating. I had never heard that theory before, but it certainly seems plausible. A great deal, I think, of what I understand of your work has to do with, shall we say, refashioning the God concept. It seems that for many people, the traditional Christian image of God is somehow outdated and no longer plausible, and that a new one somehow needs to be refashioned. And how do you see this happening, and where do you think it should go?
Well, first of all, I agree with you. It is happening. And Meister Eckhart, my favorite mystic, who was from the 14th century, says, "I pray God to rid me of God." It's a pretty radical statement, but I think a lot of people are saying that prayer consciously or unconsciously today, because in the name of God, we've done an awful lot of horrible things over the centuries, including killing indigenous religion and cultures and tribes, and slavery, and so much else. And of course, God in America has become an overused term. We stamp it on our dollar bills and coins and think MX missiles and God we trust. So, there's been an irreverence toward the sense of the transcendence of divinity. Now, just a couple of years ago, I wrote a book called Naming the Unnameable, 89 Useful and Wonderful Names for God. And so, and I got the idea for that book from Thomas Aquinas again, a very brilliant mind of the 13th century, and a Dominican, as I was a Dominican for 34 years until the previous Pope fired me. And Aquinas says in his commentary on Pseudo-Denis, the 6th century Syrian monk, he says that every being is a name for God, and no being is a name for God. Now, that is so radical that every being is a name for God. The Vedas say God has 1,000,000 names and 1,000,000 faces, which is cool. But Aquinas is saying God has trillions upon trillions of names. Every being is a name for God. To me, that just, well, I shared that with a friend of mine, a cosmologist, a physicist, and he said it took the top of his head off just to hear that one sentence that every being is a name for God. And it just opens it up. Well, really, well, let's try some on. And so that's what I do in my book with the 89 names. I go to today's science for some of them. For example, flow, the word flow, energy. Eric Jantsch wrote the important book, The Self-Organizing Universe, says God is the mind of the universe. And then he says, previously mystics said this, but because I'm saying it as a scientist, a lot more people are going to hear about it. And he's being real there. There's truth. People listen today more to scientists than to mystics. But then again, there are plenty of scientists who are mystics today. And then another scientist who I met, actually came to one of my book signings. He says God is the mind of the earth mind, the earth intelligence. And he talks about how there's not enough time for the eye to have been invented by trial and error and by chance, certainly not by chance. It's far too complex. He says there must have been an intelligence in that. And, there's a fellow named Wallace who was a peer with Darwin in birthing the evolution theory. And he's not nearly as well known. But Darwin and he worked together, and when they presented the first paper on evolution to the London Science Society, they did it back to back. And so together they birthed the concept of evolution. But after many years of working together, they split, Darwin and Wallace, over what? Over angels. Because Darwin said this has all happened by chance and so forth. And Wallace said that's impossible. There's been too much success in evolution for it just to be happenstance and chance. So he said there must have been guiding intellectual agents that assisted the process of evolution, and the word for that in the tradition is angels. So now I offer many other names such as love and joy and justice and compassion, and which of course come from religious traditions too, and beauty, and of course the divine feminine. Over my shoulder here is Kuan Yin, and Julian of Norwich here. She was the first woman to write a book in English, and she wrote it in 14th century. It wasn't published for 300 years, but in it she calls God Mother, and she develops the whole concept of God as Mother and of Christ as Mother, and the Holy Spirit is feminine too. So the point is that it's true. We have all these names for divinity, and your question is appropriate. Which ones maybe will come forward at this time when we need them? And of course, the whole idea of Gaia, which is Mother Earth, as a feminine deity, if you will, the feminine side of creation. Again, and that's found even within Christianity. Hildegard of Bingen in the 12th century talks about the earth as our mother. She goes on about that. So I think it's a wonderful time to be living in which the lid is off, if you will, and we can move from these images that have been dwelling in our psyches for a long time, like say Michelangelo's painting of God as with a long white beard, creating Adam at the top of the Sistine Chapel. God as exclusively male is, I think it's time to move beyond that. And Eckhart has some marvelous images of divinity. For example, he says God is novissimus, the newest thing in the universe. And that's really interesting. God is not this old, tired, bearded guy, but the newest being in the universe, young and playful and fresh and invigorated and excited about creation. So God as joy is one of the proposals in my book too. And Aquinas said, sure joy is God's, and this demands companionship. In other words, the reason for the universe is divine joy, to have more company to share the joy of being with. So I think any name we give God opens up all kinds of avenues. And it's where the artists have to get on board, the poets and the painters and the musicians and the playwrights and the filmmakers to carry these new images. And of course, part of the new science is the idea that the universe is unfolding, has been unfolding, and is growing and enlarging on a regular basis. And all this has to do, I think, with the built-in power of creativity. One of my books is called Creativity, where the divine and the human meet. And I think there are powers of creativity, of co-creation, are integral to whatever name we want to give divinity. That divinity is very fertile. And now that we can say the universe is 2 trillion galaxies big, each with hundreds of billions of stars, I mean, it certainly stretches the imagination. And of course, with Webb telescope going up there, in a few months, we'll be sending back, we hope, pictures of the original light of the universe. That's stunning, because so many traditions around the world use light as the common synonym for divinity. I think it is the most common synonym for divinity around the world in all traditions is God is light. You find that in Buddhism, you find it in Islam, Christianity, African religions, Celtic religions, Judaism. It's omnipresent. And remember, when we think of light, we think of sunlight ordinarily. But no, this is 13 billion years before the sun. That's the light we're going to pick up. That's pretty amazing. And could it bring the human race together to wake us up so we cease making war against each other, as in Ukraine, or against Mother Earth? And in order to preserve this amazing planet, that we get smart and start acting grown up. I think human species has been in an adolescent stage for long enough, and we got to grow up real fast now.
Yeah, well, there's certainly a lot in what you said. One thing that I thought of when you were talking about Darwin was that Darwin had a brilliant idea, which is evolution by natural selection. And unlike Wallace, he made it a single explanation for everything. All evolution was due solely to natural selection. The neo-Darwinists still insist on that. Similarly, Marx saw that history is shaped by class struggle. So everything has to be explained by class struggle. Freud had the sex theory, so everything had to be understood. So these geniuses seem to be possessed by their own ideas and distorted by them. So I'm asking you, as almost like a practical piece, how do you keep some sense of balance in your own thinking so that your ideas and your beliefs don't become demons that obsess you?
Yeah. They don't become idols, or gods that take you over. Yeah, and that's, first of all, I really echo and support what you just said. These were wonderful geniuses who had definitely an important insights on existence, as you say, psychological and otherwise. But as you say, I think that's part of the patriarchal temptation, is to make oneself into God, if you will, or even one's ideas, and we can all, that can happen to us all in smaller ways. But that's what idolatry means, that what we give birth to becomes our whole worldview. So I think that has to be balanced by humility. And like I said earlier, Descartes too, I think that where I am, I think this is where I think the new creation story from science really helps, to know that, hey, we're just one animal that's come along among others, but we are special. For one thing, we can do a special amount of damage. And, Aquinas says one human being can do more evil than all the other species put together. That's astounding. And how could he say that 700 years before Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, or Putin? Because he recognized our power, the power of our imagination and creativity and intelligence. It's there. We can do great things with it, or we can do abysmal things with it. And like I like to say, the whales have been here, 60 million years longer than we have, or more, and they haven't invented nuclear weapons. So what's wrong with them? Is there something about us? And maybe we're back to that take on original sin, an original wound that we have, that we tend to fall in love with ourselves. I think narcissism comes in there too. We fall in love with our own ideas, and then they become our gods and goddesses. They become our idols. And so you do need, I think, a bigger God, or a bigger appreciation of a bigger intelligence, wisdom, and love in the world to think, above all to think, but also to put our own efforts into perspective. And we don't want to underestimate the good things we can do. Eckhart actually says that we're always giving birth to the Christ, that the Christ is always needing to be born. And Buddhists can say we give birth to the Buddha and to the Buddha nature. And Jews can say we give birth to the image of God. So all that should be celebrated and honored, but that doesn't mean that we displace the great Christ of the cosmos, if you will, that we are serving. We are serving. We're here to serve, and of course to listen to one another and to take criticism. That helps, when you live in community, you keep each other in certain amount of, within a certain boundaries, keep your sense of humor. That's part of it too, I think, to be able to laugh at ourselves and even at our theories. So there's that dialectic, and you're right. People can get on their high horse and think that they're more important than they are. I always say that we have a belly button for a reason. It's to remind us that we didn't make ourselves, and we're all part of a lineage. And intellectually, that's true too. We stand on one another's shoulders. Learning for human is a community effort, and no one is God in that sense of the word. Hildegard of Bingen said, we are all rays of God. And just as we talk about rays of the sun as sun, so we talk about rays of God as God. But that doesn't displace the sun, talk about rays of the sun, and doesn't displace God by whatever name or explanation, because we've tapped into some truth or some energy that is godlike, that is godly, that is good.
Well, we're coming to the end of the hour, but I'd like to just ask one final question, which is, we hear a great deal about what's going on in this country today. And this inevitably brings up negatives, whether gun violence, racial discrimination, environmental desecration, and so on. But that's clearly not the whole picture. There's a lot of good counterbalancing it, even though those evils are there. So I'm wondering if you could just give us kind of a panoramic view of what's happening in the United States, neither omitting nor overemphasizing the good or the bad.
Well, I like very much that observation by Erich Fromm, who says, necrophilia grows when biophilia is stunted. I think it's a very profound statement on evil. Necrophilia grows, the love of death, when biophilia is stunted. What I like about it is it shows us a way out of necrophilia, that life is really about biophilia. We have to fall in love with life on a regular basis. I say we should fall in love 3 times a day. And I don't say that to threaten anyone's marriage or relationship, but again, to get us out of our anthropocentrism. You can fall in love with wildflowers, with trees, with stones, with animals, with planets, with galaxies, with music, with poetry. There is so much to fall in love with. And I think when there's enough falling in love going around, that we will choose biophilia, the love of life, over necrophilia. And I do think there's a lot of necrophilia happening. And I think a lot of it is due to human inventions, the whole social media that's happened in, the last third of my lifetime. Obviously, we invent things, we humans, because we are so creative, but we don't think about the consequences. And even the modern worldview, I mean, it accomplished a lot to Newton's science, for example. We got to the moon and back on Newton's science. That's quite a lot, but also electricity and all of it. I mean, it's made our lives better and so forth. But we didn't calculate everything into it, like what we were doing to Mother Earth and extracting, her elements from the earth, etc., and of course, killing indigenous cultures to get to these riches and all the rest. So I think that we're quite short-sighted about looking at consequences before they overwhelm us. And so now we're paying the bill. This generation is paying the bill on 500 years of really profound neglect of Mother Earth. And so, and then we have this rabid, for decades we had hate radio, and then now we have hate television, and we have hate politics. I mean, I don't think it's that esoteric to propose that if we can't regulate and relegate in some way the darkest passions in all of us, and it's not just someone else, we're all capable of hate, But if we can't relegate that in some way, you can't have a community that survives. And certainly we can't have democracy. And I do think that democracy is up for grabs in America today, as it is in many places around the world. A lot of it is not intentional, like I say. A lot of it is because we've got these modes of communication where you can pour your hate out and then it links to someone else's hate. I mean, we're all interconnected, but not only about good things, but about bad things too. So I just think we often underestimate the powers of our inventions. And do we have time to catch up to them before the dark side, the shadow side, overwhelms us? So I think it is a time for being very alert and critical and self-critical. It's not just be critical of the other. We all have to be critical of self too. What role are we playing in destroying the earth or in destroying democracy? And how can we contribute together to save both? And so we are living in very notable times. I really do think that we're at a crossroad as a species. And clearly that's the case with climate change, but it's also the case with war. I mean, we're hearing words from Russia that another step could be nuclear war. And Putin's spokesperson has not denied that. So, you know, we're on edge. And we all have to ground ourselves in the kind of things you and I have been talking about, the goodness of creation and the presence of the divine and of love and of justice, the capacity for all that. And we have to fill our souls with that at the same time that we're not in denial about the suffering and the evil that is present. Evil is a very powerful force, and it's smart. It doesn't walk around with a sign on its back saying, "I'm evil, kick me." It wears rings and it wears has lots of money in its pocket, and it goes where there's power. It loves to go where there's power, whether in religion or government or military, what have you. So we have to be alert. We can't be naive about our capacity for evil and our capacity for extinction. Every one of our ancestors said 14 that we've counted so far are out of business. We're the last one standing. And that should motivate us. Wow, here's a chance to carry on this invention of the hominids. But to do so, I think we have to move to this new level of humanity that all the great spiritual teachers, from the Dalai Lama to the Buddha to Muhammad to Jesus to Black Elk to Isaiah, that they all are talking about, that we're capable of compassion. But it's a bit of work to get there. It's a bit of work to get there. We can't be lazy, and we can't just absorb the values of a materialistic culture. We have to offer something bigger, and that's part of biophilia.
Well, thank you very much. This has been very profound and inspiring. It's also been an hour, so I believe we should honor our time limit. Anyway, I'm very grateful for you taking time to do this. So your latest book is entitled Essential Writings on Creation Spirituality. And I hope you have much success with it. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciated your provocative questions.